Welcome to a John Hansard Gallery talk with artist Parminder Kaur and Alia Saeed. Joining them today is myself, Nadia Thondrayan, exhibitions curator here at John Hansard Gallery, part of the University of Southampton. This talk is funded by IKT, International Association of Curators of Contemporary Art, and the Harold Seesman Grant awarded to John Hansard Gallery. Today's talk is the second of two events, the first of which took place earlier in July this year. Alia is connecting with us today from Mimosa House, and we would like to thank Mimosa House and Open City Documentary Festival for their kind hospitality. So I wondered whether you could talk about power dynamics within your work. There are clear references to hierarchies with works such as Tower, made in 2014, Small Table, made in 2021, and Small Tower, also made in 2021. I wondered whether these references or power dynamics also exist amongst your soft animal-like structures. Sorry, have I gotten? Yeah, no, it is 2014. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very much interested in power dynamics and hierarchies in the work. And I think this is quite obvious in the works where I use furniture. So this image I'm showing you here was a commission that I made for Letchworth. And the title of the project was called A Vision of Utopia. And they wanted the artist to look at what made, because Letchworth was the first garden city, and it was built on utopian ideals of trying to combine living in the countryside and living in towns to make it, have both within the city. And so I thought I'd make a tower, because a tower is often symbolic, of a city growing or a landmark to show how successful a place is. So I've made this work, which is 7 chairs, which I've stacked up one on top of each other. And so for me, in ways, this work is about conformity, because the chairs have to be stacked in a certain order. But it's also like choosing your place in society. Like, would you like to be on the biggest chair at the bottom? I mean, that feels lovely because you've got this big chair, and you can feel powerful. Or would you like to be at the top of the pile? But however, this chair is the smallest one, the most uncomfortable. So it talks about that. So you have to decide where you would fit. And then if you decide where you fit, then you have a place. So I was questioning about the notion of utopia, if there is such a thing as utopia, because even utopia requires a certain level of conformity. And then the next image, let's see what I've got. This was a work again shown at 5 Howard Place. And here I had a small table and chairs. And on that I had an even smaller set of 4 table and chairs. So this is like about a power relationship between the large chair, which is isolated and on its own, and then the 4 smaller chairs sitting on the table. And it's like saying, which chair would you like to sit on in some ways? So would you like to be on the big chair on your own, and maybe you'd have control, or would you like to be on the 4 smaller chairs, and then you'd have other chairs with you, and then you have this colorful carpet as well. So it looks like quite a welcoming and an inviting space. And so in the furniture work, it's quite easy to see how I play with hierarchy, because I do that by playing with scale. So if I make large, tall things, it makes the viewer quite small. And so it's about the gigantic or about the grotesque in some way, sometimes. But then if I make the work small, then you feel more protective over the work, and you want to protect whatever is there. If it's my fabric creatures, or even the small chair, if it was sitting on its own. So in that way, that's how I play with hierarchy. And I was wondering, in your question, how do I do that with my fabric forms? And in this work, I sort of think that in the fabric forms, I don't do it so much, or it's not so obvious. But there is relationships, like with these black teddies. These ones are bigger, because when I made the teddy bears, I made them 4 different sizes. So these are the largest ones, which were about 1 meter high. And there's relationships going on because you're not sure what's happening. Like you can't see it in this image, but there's two teddies guarding in the front left. So when you come in, you have to bypass a set of teddy bears, and then you're entering into their space in some ways because they have this barrier there, and you're not sure if the barrier is to keep them in or to keep everybody else out. But there's certain things going on there. Like you've got the three teddies in the middle, and they're just like having a conversation, and they're not interested in what's going on around them. And then in the back wall, you'll see one teddy standing and another teddy is lying down. So you're not sure what's going on. So there is a power relationship even within the teddies and what's going on. But looking at hierarchy and power structure is just one element of my work. So I'm interested in protection, defense, insecurity, instability. So that's just one element of my work.
Essentially, this whole structure was built to house the Searchlight. And right along the Kent coastline, you have lots of these remnants of this Second World War battlements and objects that are to do with military might, but also to do with surveillance. And I suppose for me, coming across that in Southend was quite shocking in a way, because it was also at the time of Brexit, and this whole notion of like Britain as a sovereign nation. And at that moment, when I was there, at that moment, people were not crossing onto the Kent coastline. They weren't crossing the Channel in that way, but obviously now they are. So I made it in 2016, and it was in response to Abdul Rahman Haroon, who was a refugee, and he was the first person to walk through the Channel Tunnel. And he walked through the Channel Tunnel on the 17th of August 2015. I think it's 31 miles. And when he got to the other end, he was arrested. And he was held in Emily Prison for almost around about 5 months. And he was charged under the Malicious Damage Act of 1861. So in order to control and reprimand him, the only law they could actually charge him on was this 1861 law that was actually came about in relation to people stealing the railway tracks. When the railway tracks first got introduced to the country, people would go and take the iron. Well, actually, they're doing it again now. So that this was what he was charged on. And I sort of wanted to respond in some way to this, this is on a wing and a prayer. So I wanted to respond in some way to this. And so I decided that obviously I can't walk through the Channel Tunnel, or I didn't feel like I could. But so I walked through the Rotherhithe Tunnel. So the video is made with a GoPro camera on my head and also one on the back of my head. So there's a forward view and a backward view.
Sovereign law establishes its ethical character by the degree to which it encroaches on and also protects the sovereign actions of the individual citizen. Currently, one key measure of that relationship in the UK is the period of 14 days, being the point beyond which the interests of the individual cannot be overridden by the interests of the state. Whether constructed to protect or dominate, the function of a citadel is to help demarcate or determine citizenship, to establish by a display of authority who is and is not entitled to belong.
Yeah, so David Hurd wrote a text about, he wrote a text called View from Dover. And it was about an asylum centre on the Dover cliffs. And he wrote about it, and he wrote about the journey that, although my video is about the actual physical feat of walking through the Channel Tunnel, David Hurd's text was about the legal process that you have to go through. So, I mean, again, I really quite like this video under this title of Meta Incognita. Meta Incognita means unknown limit. And so even when you arrive in this country, you then have to go through the legal procedure of claiming asylum, which is an unending process.
I had a question about when positioning your work within a gallery space, the seepage of sound, memory, remembered space, and actual place becomes an extension of the filmmaking process. Can you talk a little bit about how the films, when positioned together, build on a narrative? And would you choose to add other works in this particular exhibition if you could?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a bit like when Parminder was talking about placing her bed bugs under the bed. Like, she's got one object which has its own resonances, but then when you place it in relation to something else, it sort of breaks down that sort of literaliness. I'm not saying that Parminder's work's literary, but it breaks down a singular meaning. And I think that happens with the works, the observation post, because which was why I was talking about the view. You know, it could be more neutral, but the sort of idea of the power of this view, the sort of vertical horizon, this idea of the perspectival space that became so much entwined with the military might right from the very beginning, in relation to this video of Honouring Our Prayer, where actually the body is forced into a particular sensibility. So I think when these two works are placed together, that this idea of surveillance and also this idea of power and powerlessness becomes more apparent. But also the way that, I don't know if you can hear the sound that's coming from Meta Incognita, but that then also the sound that comes from this film then creates a sort of acoustic envelope.
I slipped into English territory at dawn. The end of my journey is in sight. My movement through these waters has been carefully calibrated to confuse the logic of the majesties. A votive offering, given up to sea roads of the past. Only Boreas has taken heed.
Explosions may be noticed in the vicinity.
26th of January. Sunrise 07:17. Sunset 16:21. 51 degrees, 39 minutes, 29 seconds north. 1 degree, 36 minutes, 5 seconds east.
And so the journey becomes, the voiceover is the story of the ship's captain returning from the Arctic with this resource, and it's her logbook. And the logbook, on one hand, is just about the places and the points where she's talking, you know, what coordinates are, but on the other hand, it's the stories that I then interviewed people on Foulness Island, and it's a sort of combination of many of their stories, and that becomes her story. So it's sort of really based on quite a lot of documentary facts in a way, because the coordinates are from the ship Nunavik, which is a Canadian trawler who actually does now go through the Northwest Passage, and they published their logbook on the internet. So I sort of reappropriated that, and I was thinking about it, why had I not used the people's voices from the island? And I suddenly remembered that the people who spoke to me who are from Foulness Island all have to sign the Official Secrets Act. So although they were happy to speak to me, they didn't want to be associated with the specific words. So that was another way of speaking about the actuality through a fiction. So that became Meta Incognita.
I have one last question. And it's a general question. Considering the last 2 years, how have you managed to stay connected to your respective artistic practices? Have you discovered new connections and new networks via the internet and online platforms? Paminda, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I have made a lot more networks online because you had to during the pandemic, and then having an exhibition that was started in December 2020 and then closing down almost immediately and being open, so then I had to try and disseminate the exhibition and the information about the exhibition, and then talking to people. And because everyone was at home, everything was done online. In some ways, it was easier to talk to people because everybody wasn't busy traveling, going from place to place. And on that level, it was quite good to build networks and contacts and meet new people online.
On another level, my work is quite solitary anyhow. And I've done a few writing courses, and I've just started to do a blog because I got a arts because I got an Arts Council grant to develop my own creative practice, and part of that, is to do with writing. And I said that I was going to do a blog, and actually the whole idea of doing a blog filled me with. Actually, I was bored. I wasn't interested in the idea of doing a blog at all. Especially because it was to do with how it was very much to do, because I started doing a screenwriting course. It was about to do with my progress in relation to learning this new discipline. And I have learned quite a lot in relation to that new discipline, but for me, it didn't feel, I didn't feel compelled to write. And then probably like a lot of people, just horrified of the current situation in relation to Afghanistan. And so watching the news, and I was just thinking, why are people talking about this in relation to 20 years? Does nobody know that the West's involvement has been going on for more than 150, almost 200 years in Afghanistan? There has been regime control in Afghanistan. And they say it's 20 years. And you can tell by my voice I'm getting cross. No. So how can I, so I've started a blog, but I've actually started a blog, and I've made it out of, I've again fictionalized it. So it's a conversation between two friends. So I've started a blog about how do we tell stories, but also how, this whole idea of fiction, fact, storytelling,